Lord Jesus, that's our prayer today. We want to know you more. We want to give our lives to you more fully. God, would you forgive us for the times where we hold back, where we try to take control of various areas of our life and we don't give them to you. God, we're sorry for those sins. In fact, we take a moment right now in silence to confess those things to you. Lord Jesus, we thank you for your forgiveness and for your grace and for your love. We thank you that no matter how far we've ran with you, it's just one step back. God, I pray that this morning, that as we study your word, that you would help us to know you more, to experience your love and your grace in our lives this day. For God, we do love you, and we pray this in Jesus' holy name. Amen. Amen. You may be seated, friends. So this morning we're wrapping up our series called Dear Church, and in this series we've been looking at some letters that can be written to the church from people perhaps outside the church who want to just understand some things about why it is we do certain things, and they might have some questions. And today's letter is read by Abby Feltz, Pastor Brady's wife. Pastor Brady was preaching here last week, by the way. I missed you guys. I was at the Y last weekend, so I enjoyed that too. But boy, it sure is always good to be back with you. And so this letter, Abby is reading, and it's not her letter, though. It's actually a letter that was written by a member of the staff, actually, at the YMCA that Brady's been reaching out to, who doesn't come to our Y campus yet, but hopefully will someday. And she was kind of sharing her experience growing up with the church. And today we're asking the question, Dear Church, why do you talk about money so much? Let's check this out.
Dear Church, I grew up going to church with my mom and my two brothers. And the church we attended, it talked about money a good bit, which didn't really bother me at first, but then as I got older, I began to notice that there was a lot of pressure put on people to give. And I remember seeing how some members were treated with more respect or honor because they were some of the big givers in the church. They had given more money than most of the other people. Meanwhile, my mom was raising my brothers and I on her own, and so she never really had much to give in that sense. God and church were always important to her, and she really wanted us to stay connected. But the more that I watched the church, and the more that I felt like the church wasn't as concerned with her because of how little she gave. Somewhere around high school, I finally got tired of it, and I stopped attending church. I never lost my connection with God, but I never felt at home in the church. So, dear church, why do you talk about money so much? Signed, Gary.
It's a very fair question, isn't it? Because sometimes churches can give kind of an overemphasis to financial things. I remember talking to somebody in this community once, and they learned that I was a pastor, and I was telling them a little bit about Stillwater, and they said, at Stillwater Church, do you guys talk about money very much? And you kind of tell the implication is the answer should be no, right? And I said, actually, yes, we do, every single weekend. And he goes, really? I said, yeah, we do. Every single weekend we take an offering, and I tell the people, thank you for your generosity, and here's some things that it goes to impact. Here's ways that you're giving impacts. They're like, oh, I never thought of it that way. Like, well, yeah, it doesn't mean that we're trying to, tighten the screws on folks here, it's that we're thankful. We're thankful for folks' generosity. That's really important to us. So yeah, we talk about it. But the letter reveals, and we all know that throughout time, there's been many ways the church has kind of messed this up. We talk about the church, we mean the big church in general. And there'd be a number of ways that we could highlight, but I'll highlight just three of them today. The first would be one called prosperity gospel. Prosperity gospel. You may have heard of this. It's basically taking some truth from the Bible, but taking it to an extent that becomes problematic. And this understanding of the gospel focuses on verses that talk about how God wants to bless you, prosper you, all these things, which are absolutely true. They are. God absolutely does. but it focuses excessively on the financial aspects of that. And heresy comes when we take something that at its core has some truth, but we take it to extremes that become problematic. Like I gave an illustration yesterday. I said, let's say that I told you that on Saturdays that Pastor Jon likes to watch the Ohio State Buckeyes win while drinking Mountain Dew. Okay? True story, right? So yesterday was a pretty decent day there, right? So you know that I've told you this. So what happens, you go home from church Saturday night, it's evening and you're hanging out, you're like, I wonder what Pastor Jon is doing now. Wait a minute, he told us. On Saturday, he likes to watch the Ohio State Buckeyes win and drink Mountain Dew. We know that's what he's doing. He already said it. He must have DVR'd the game. He's watching it again, right? And it gets later in the evening. What's he doing? Well, we know it's Saturday. Drinking Mountain Dew, watching the Buckeyes win, right? It used to be like about 11:30 at night. You're like, man, I'm concerned about him because it's still Saturday. He must be so caffeinated up right now. He's not going to sleep all night long, He's going to come to church the next day, and he's going to be like, on the one hand, buzzed with caffeine, but then the other hand, no sleep whatsoever. And he's just talking about the Buckeyes. This is going to be terrible. What's going to happen? Well, that's not actually what happens, right? I watched the game one time, I had one pop, and there we are. That would be a silly example of taking something way too far. And when you push it to such an extent, it becomes not true anymore. We've seen plenty of examples of this. I don't need to give a ton, but there was one pastor a few years ago who made an ask of his people to buy a really nice jet. This jet's here about a $70 million jet. And he asked his followers to purchase this for him. Now, to be fair, he only asked them for $300 a person, right? Which doesn't sound too bad until you realize he was asking for that from 200,000 people, which would raise over $60 million for his own personal transportation. Now, I'm not saying that planes are evil. Of course they're not. But in a world where children are starving to death this day, to raise $67 million for one guy's transportation, that doesn't seem at all to be the will of God to me. Okay, I mean, we had another famous televangelist said that flying on a commercial plane was not safe for televangelists because these are giant tubes that are full of demons. Now, I don't know about you, but I have enough faith to believe that God can protect me from the demons of commercial aircraft. I mean, hopefully you do, right? I think it's going to be okay, right? It's nothing new. In 1987, Oral Roberts told his followers that if he did not raise $8 million, that God was going to call him home. That God was going to literally end his life. Some might call that manipulative. I don't know, right? Thankfully for Oral, he raised $9 million, so God didn't have to take him out there. Right? But regardless, we can see how this has been abused and misused. Okay? That's not what the church is called to. The second way we've got this wrong would be hoarding. Hoarding is when churches take things to an extreme. And instead of putting trust in God, we put our trust in our bank account. Now, every church needs to have some savings, just like you need to have savings at home. And at Stillwater, we have a healthy level of savings, but not so much that we can put our trust in it or our faith in it. Truth is, if we all stopped giving, it wouldn't be long before Stillwater Church wouldn't be functional anymore. Because we don't have years and years and years in the bank, because we know that we're called by God to take the money that's given and to put it into ministry. I have a pastor friend, pastors a church just around half the size of Stillwater. And in their bank account, they have an investment account that is literally $13 million. They had some very generous gifts in time past. And I was talking to him, and he said, you wouldn't believe how hard it is to pastor a church with a $13 million endowment. I said, really? Tell me about it. I'm feeling for you, really. I mean, my heart hurts, He said, no, seriously. He said, nobody wants to give. Nobody wants to serve. Whenever something needs done, we say, oh, we've got the money. We can just go have that done. So nobody is committed to the church. We just come here because it doesn't ask much of us because we've got that much in the bank. I said, well, that's a good point. That does sound really tough. However, I'm willing to try. If you just write a check for $13 million to Stillwater Church, I'll give it a swing, but he didn't do that, so apparently it's not as bad as he's making it out to be. Third, gaudy generosity. Another way that we mess this up is gaudy generosity. That's when we put excessive emphasis on giving and on who's giving this, okay? Kind of like we heard in the letter. You've seen this if you've been to a church that has those little placards on everything that says, given in honor of so-and-so. I was at a church last year, and they had these everywhere. And my favorite one I found, it was on this pew, I think. And I don't remember the guy's name, I'll just make up a name. It said, this pew given by Dr. James Smith and wife. Well, that seems kind of odd. I mean, shouldn't she be able, if we're going to name him, shouldn't we be able to name her too, right? But then I started thinking, maybe Dr. Smith is like this futurist, really a big vision for the future, who also has a very bad marriage, right? So he's like, I'm not going to name her because I'm not sure how many different wives will be sitting in this pew in time, I only have to give one, right? It'll be great, so I don't know if that's it or not. At the church I served, we had very few of these things around. There were hardly any of these little placards, but there was one, and it was my favorite, because it was on, I'm not kidding, it was on an electric stapler in the office. I don't know how much electric staplers cost back in the heyday of electric staplers, but apparently it's more than I realized, right? Because some pastor must have gone to some sweet old lady and said, if you give this amount, every time we staple a paper, we'll think of you from now on. And they're like, yes, this would be amazing. I will fund that stapler. And it's a problem. Because when churches do this, the reason you won't see a lot of that here around Stillwater is it makes it seem like some givers are more important than others. And listen, friends, we're judged based on the amount of our sacrifice, not on the dollar amount that is. And I can tell you from different times in my life, giving sacrificially is not just about how many dollars it is. When we told you before, we were tithing in seminary, it was a lot less than we're tithing today, but it was no less of a sacrifice, and it was no less significant to God. It's not about this dollar amount, it's about where your heart is in that giving and in that tithing. So these are just a few ways the church gets it wrong. But I don't want to stay focused on that. Let's talk about what does it look like when the church gets it right. Well, the opposite of gaudy generosity would be quiet generosity. Okay, this is how Jesus calls us to give. Look at Matthew 6, verse 1. Watch out. Don't do your good deeds publicly to be admired by others, for you will lose the reward from your Father in heaven. When you give to someone in need, don't do as the hypocrites do, blowing trumpets in the synagogues and the streets to call attention to their acts of charity. I tell you the truth, they have received all the reward they'll ever get. So this is important. It's showing us that number one, that God rewards generous giving. He does. It's implicit in that passage. But number two, that we're not supposed to be receiving some big reward, big attention here on earth for our giving. We're supposed to do it quietly. In fact, look at the instructions that Jesus gives. He says, when you give to someone in need, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. That's pretty subtle, don't you think? Give your gifts in private, and your Father who sees everything will reward you. This is one of the many things I love about Stillwater, because there have been many, many times where someone has come up to me and has said, you know what, John, we have some extra resources that we believe God is giving us, or calling us to give above and beyond that which we normally give. Is there anything that the church would do? And there have been a variety of things. That's our riding lawnmower, that projector shoots that image, recently speakers at the wire, projector at the wire, a variety of things I could go on and on. But in every one of those, the person says, now here's the deal. I don't want others to know who gave this. See, they've read the verse. And that's what Jesus calls us to do, is to give in ways that are not for show. So we don't put our name on these things, because we want the real reward that comes from God. Quiet generosity. Second thing, open books. This refers to how a church looks at money, talks about money. Because We believe here at Stillwater that we should be accountable for the way that we spend money. That's why our budget is an open document. If you want to come and see how much VBS cost last year, I don't really know how much it was, but we can look it up and we're happy to tell you. You want to know how much children's curriculum costs, how much these chairs cost, how much whatever it is, it's open. It's not a secret. Now, we don't just stand up here and talk about it all day, every day, because, that's not our focus. But the information's there. The only number we wouldn't tell you is lay staff compensation. We just tell you what that is total. You don't usually go to a waitress or a restaurant and say, how much does that waitress make? How much does that waiter make? But we would lump it together. Pastor compensation, well, of course, that's public because it's set by our church conference every single year. So we have open books, and we're cool with that because we want to be accountable for this. John Wesley, our founder of United Methodism, he lived this way. He started off, he didn't make much money, and he basically lived on what he made, and after tithing 10%. But as his ministry grew, his income grew substantially. But yet Wesley kept his lifestyle about the same. And so by the end of Wesley's life, there was sometimes where he was literally giving away 97% of his income. So he received a lot, but he gave a lot, and he was open about that. Not for showing off purposes, but he journaled about that, so people could go back and look and see how he had used resources. Okay, so quiet generosity and open books. The third thing is it's a Christ-like challenge for us to talk about money. Okay, the reason we're not ashamed to talk about it here is because Jesus talked about it. And Jesus talked about it a lot, in fact. Interestingly, 16 of the 38 parables are focused on money and possessions. In the Gospels, 1 out of every 10 verses has something to do with money and possessions. In the Bible as a whole, you have around 500 verses on prayer, around 400 verses on faith. That's 900 combined. But about money, you have 2,000 different verses. Now, why does the Bible emphasize it so much? Well, if there's one thing that could become an idol to us, that could cause distance between us and God, I think that thing is money. It's so easy for us to get wrapped up in our kind of American consumerism and to forget the essential things of faith. Also, money is a phenomenal opportunity for us to serve, to give, to be generous. Because God calls us to do just that. And when we are generous, God uses it to do such incredible things. So we're not embarrassed to talk about money because of this. Jesus addressed this problem of money once in the church. You remember the story when he came into the temple, it's the Feast of Passover. And remember, the money changers were abusing people, basically. What they were doing is that Passover was the time where people would come to offer a sacrifice. And Jews would come from all over. They'd come from the countryside, some would come from other countries, and they would do a couple things. They would give an offering, and this offering was supposed to be a half of a shekel. Shekel's a Jewish coin. And many of them had Roman coins instead. So they had to change these, exchange them. Like if you go to another country and you need to change your dollars for whatever their currency is. But if you do that, you don't want to do it at the airport, right? Because they always rip you off now. They give you a bad exchange rate, usually. And what was happening here at the temple was they were doing just that. They were ripping off the worshipers. And also, they were selling sacrificial animals there. Because if you're traveling for a long, long ways, was anybody ever taking a vacation and taking their pet with them? It's not always easy, right? And imagine if your pet was like a sheep, they probably don't like long journeys either. So instead of taking your sheep from home, you'd wait till you got to the temple and you'd buy one. But they were overcharging. And the high priests were taking a cut out of all this money, okay? And so what they were doing was they were taking these people who came with honest and sincere hearts to worship God, and they were ripping them off. And Jesus, not happy about this at all. Matthew 21:12, Jesus entered the temple and began to drive out the people buying and selling animals for sacrifice. He knocked over the table of the money changers and the chairs of those selling doves. He said to them, "The scriptures declare, my temple will be called a house of prayer, but you have turned it into a den of thieves." Now this is not like sweet Jesus, meek and mild, right? Or sweet baby Jesus here. No, this is a grown man who's very angry. And it should be. It makes God angry when the church gets this wrong. And you know, at Stillwater, one of the things that we love to do is we love to give things away. That's why food is free, the coffee's free, the Bibles are free, the counseling is free, classes are free. If there's an expense for a book that we pass on, you can't afford it, hey, we'll pay for it. You know, the truth is none of these things are free. Of course, they all cost money, but we're able to do this because our church is so generous. And we don't ever want money to stop people from encountering Jesus. But we don't ever want money to be something that divides the people of Stillwater into different classes. Whether you make virtually nothing or whether you make a ton, you are welcome here. Everybody's welcome here. And everybody's welcome to come to the table and to eat, to be part of this, because it's not about how much you make, it's about our heart of generosity. It's about responding to God's grace in that way. So yeah, absolutely we'll talk about money, and we talk about it because Jesus talks about it. And because it's something that helps us to focus our lives on Jesus, and that by giving it appropriate, not excessive focus, it allows us to do the best ministry that we possibly can. I love the fact that back in the day when we were having to cut budgets, we went through some tough years. And during that time, though, we cut overhead expenses by a lot, by 6 figures. But in that time, we actually raised ministry budgets. Because that's why we're here. We're here to do ministry. So we found cheaper ways of doing all sorts of different things, but we were able to increase the amount of money that we're putting into ministry. Look back to 2012 today, we give away about 8 times what we gave away back then. And I'm so excited about that. Whether it's to our brothers and sisters in Cuba, or to a mission in Tijuana that we've supported for many, many years, or whether it's through our local United Methodist giving that plants churches right here in our community, or supports missionaries on the other side of the globe, whatever it is, when we give, it funds all of those things. And I'm so thankful for you and for your support, because it is literally changing lives around the globe. And it's exactly what Jesus would want us to do. See, after Jesus kicked the money changers, the rip-off guys out of the temple, look at what he did. Verse 14. The blind and the lame came to him in the temple, and he healed them. The leading priests and teachers of the religious law saw these wonderful miracles, and even heard the children in the temple shouting, "Praise God for the Son of David." I think this is so cool. The high priest wants to rip you off. Jesus, he's healing for free. He's saying, come, be healed. Here I am. I want to give. And that's who we're called to be. That's who we're called to be as the church, is the one that's bringing healing, that's offering grace, that's showing them Jesus, the one who truly heals, the one who truly brings salvation, the one who truly brings wholeness. And why do we do this? Well, Jesus says in Matthew 6:19, don't store up treasures here on earth, where moths eat them and rust destroys them, where thieves break in and steal. No, store your treasures in heaven, where moths and rust cannot destroy, and thieves don't break in and steal. Because where your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will be also. I conclude with that. For you, where's your treasure? If you look at your checkbook, your credit card, however it is you pay stuff, where is your treasure? Where are you investing in, church? Because God wants to take our giving, to bless it, and to use it to change the world for Him. And when we are generous like that, God uses that to change our hearts as well. Would you pray with me? God, thank you so much for the gifts that you give us, for the resources that you've entrusted to us. God, would you take our generosity and use it to do exponentially greater things than we could ever do on